And good afternoon. Thank you for signing up and joining our webinar today. My name's Conor Horgan, a consultant at KT based in the UK, and I'm presenting this webinar today with my esteemed colleague, Andrew Vermes, a senior consultant who's been with KT the past 28 years. We're here to discuss how you leaders can harness the flow of information in your organization starting today. We'll be discussing how to speed up the flow of usable information in your business to enable quicker and more effective decision-making, problem-solving, and identification of risks and opportunities. Please post questions as you think of them to Andrew in the chat box. You just need to click on the call-out symbol at the bottom of your screen. Andrew will also be running 2 or 3 polls during today's webinar for you to contribute to. We'll be sharing the results as we go. We'll be leaving plenty of time to answer the questions at the end. And thank you to those who have already sent some in. And we hope to see a busy chat box. So before we get going, here's a short introduction to who we are and why we're able to provide some insight for you today. We're a relatively small consultancy, formed 65 years ago, with around 200 employees worldwide, but with a big reach. We're utilized in 167 countries by 94 of the Fortune 100 companies and have had more than 4.2 million professionals engaging with our methodologies to date. We continue to have some pretty spectacular results, with some of them summarized on the right-hand side. What we do derives from how we get organizations to think. Kepner-Tregoe and Charles Kepner focused on 5 key patterns on critical thinking that can drive the productivity of entire organizations. They created methodologies which have become the gold standard in getting the holistic view, finding cause, choosing the best course of action, foreseeing future problems, and foreseeing future opportunities. They stated that the responsibility for driving this way of thinking starts at the top. Leaders must ingrain this thinking in the center of their organization so the workforce is aligned in how they think and therefore communicate. When done carefully, the productivity of the entire organization increases. They concluded that good performance was less dependent on knowledge and experience, but more on these 5 key thinking processes. And that leads us to our webinar topic today. Leaders underestimate their ability to impact the flow of communication in their organizations. You have the ability to harness your information ecosystem to get your company better aligned. Question is, what information do you have to make visible in your organizations to speed up effective decision-making? After we discuss some of the biggest challenges organizations face in their decision-making journey, we will then share ways to overcome these challenges. The 5 main messages form the agenda on this slide. We then conclude by highlighting the 5 compass points you have at your disposal when heading back to your organizations. There will be a recurring message throughout today's webinar. Whatever we're trying to do as leaders, we want to ensure visibility throughout the process so that it leads to increased confidence. Confidence that your teams know how it will work and foresee obstacles and opportunities, therefore enabling excellent execution. Visibility, confidence, execution. Write these down as they underpin every message. We've taken a selection of common challenges that we see, and we'd like to first run a quick poll with you. So in 30 seconds, which of these communication challenges is most significant for your organization? The poll is live. Thank you for the first person. 55 to go. Okay, last 10 seconds. Okay, Andrew.
And there we have it. We're just sharing the results now. But interesting, isn't it? This hasn't changed over the years. We're talking to many of you. Missing information, 33% is the leader, followed by people misunderstanding the context of problems. Other stuff less important. Risk assessment, priority conflict, somewhat less important, but still an issue for you to work with. So I'm going to stop sharing and let you move on, Conor.
Excellent. So what will you get from today's webinar? Well, it can be split into 5 main takeaways in the colored boxes. These tackle some of the common challenges seen in the bullet points underneath. Get your organizations to understand the issues by sharing the backstory. Many organizations cite poor communication, but when broken down, what they often mean is a lack of visibility and clarity of issues and how they all link together. You can help overcome this by sharing the backstory. Get your organization quicker at searching for cause. Businesses are filled with assumptions that are not made visible. We need to separate ideas, assumptions, and guesses from facts. And we will tell you the key questions to ask to get to cause quicker. Overcome challenges with choosing solutions by getting better stakeholder alignment. We will discuss what information needs to be made visible to make stakeholder alignment easier for you. We'll then discuss how you can visualize risk effectively by placing it in the context of the bigger decision to actually speed up decision-making. We'll also introduce a new concept we call Hansel and Gretel risk management to help ensure you have your preventative and mitigating actions work. Then we want you to be able to harvest opportunities by mapping it out in a way that ensures successful execution. Preparing for best case scenario is so foreign to so many organizations. We're much more comfortable preparing for worst case. We'll share one way to realize opportunities. Again, underpinning each takeaway message is the need to keep your organization's thinking visible throughout, because visibility leads to higher confidence in decisions and better execution. Here's an example of when it goes wrong. In 2018 and 2019, Boeing 737 MAX aircrafts of Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines crashed with loss of lives. The cause was traced to a stall prevention system redesign a year earlier. The real cause can be seen in failures much earlier than that. The issue here is a familiar one for most of you. We see a problem, in this case, the stall characteristics of an aircraft, and then we design a solution. As so often happens, the solutions create another different problem, which goes on to cause havoc because we haven't seen the complete picture. You can read the report of the US FAA yourself if you have the time. It's worth reading for those with an interest in prevention. We'll get on to this later in the session. You might notice the opportunities box here is missing. With the loss of lives, we thought it would be insensitive to talk about it here. But the key is that changes were made without knowledge and visibility of previous changes. Poor investigations were done from previous flight problems. The stakeholders were not aligned, with some privately predicting the MCAS system could cause 15 crashes over 13 years, but there was no clarity or agreement on what decision needed to be made prior to the crashes. Risk assessments were obviously done, but there were preventative and contingent actions missing due to holes in their plan. So what we'll be talking to you about today are real-life issues with real-life consequences. However, you'll be happy to know that our messages from here on in will be more of a positive call to action on what you can do to improve your organizations. So now we've had the intro, let's head to our first takeaway message of the day. Share the backstory. To understand the situation, we need to share the backstory. Before we can effectively contribute to discussions, debates, decisions, finding cause, we need to understand what led us there. But how do we do that in a concise way? By getting a concise exposure to the backstory, it speeds up the ability for key stakeholders to be aligned and contribute both quicker and more effectively, thus giving you a better probability of more effective decisions. Look at the first two questions on the slide. If you ask these questions effectively, you get the backstory. The third question is a prompt to ensure that other key stakeholders get it too. Sharing the backstory allows your stakeholders to be better aligned. It provides a trail to understand the context in which decisions were made and allows for quicker contributions to discussions. But how much detail do you need? This is a simple way of representing the backstory during a live incident. A simple issue log that you keep an eye on. Seeing red or green lights pop up on a screen is not the same as sharing what exactly the issue is or where it's come from. You need to keep the rolling news visible. We know it works because any high-performing incident team has a rolling news screen to keep them up to date and their thinking visible. If you're not keeping the rolling news visible, you need to. Here's an example of how precise the comms needs to be. It contains what the issue is, why it needs attention, i.e. the impact, and then the next steps. Importantly, it provides other members of the team opportunities to contribute quickly and effectively. So users are experiencing a delay in e-banking, specifically the Northwest users waiting 35 seconds for transactions to complete, and it's rising. The customers are reacting by posting negative message to your Twitter account. The team also noticed that an upgrade ran last night, but they're unsure if there's any link between that change and the issue. This is another key point we strongly advise. It's important to encourage the sharing of unknowns. In this example, someone has shared they were unsure if there was a link. Encourage your people to declare the unknowns. By laying out the communication so clearly and succinctly, it allows an expert the ability to comment, intervene, and contribute. For example, to state there's no link between the upgrade and the e-banking. You need to do this in real time. If it's made visible, you'll be able to react quickly and appropriately. Wouldn't that be lovely? Setting this as the standard in your organization is one way of saving time and improving the effectiveness of your communication. So this is a way to make a written communication more concise when sharing the backstory live. But how about when you're verbally communicating? If you're having challenges getting clear explanations, here's something for you to try. We call it the 10-second rule. People have a tendency to over-explain. The longer the explanation or the information given, the harder it is to make a decision on the back of it. You can encourage your team to raise issues clearly, one at a time, and avoid over-explanation by following a 10-second rule. This is the issue. This is why it needs attention. This is what I suggest needs to happen. All in 10 seconds, and then be quiet. Let others then ask questions to get the information they need before moving on to the next issue. There are clear examples on the screen that follow this 10-second rule. What impact would this have to your role? Why not give it a go and see? So if your organization's to understand the issues better, share the backstory. Provide context. Make it visible to the organization what led us here. Keep it visible. If it's visible at the point an issue arises, it provides other members of the team opportunities to quickly and effectively contribute. Keep it concise. What benefits would your organization get from following the 10-second rule? So we should strive to be more concise when escalating issues, and we should do likewise when searching for cause. There are times when full process is required for investigations, but most of the time, we want and need something quicker. So what shortcuts are available? To start with, you must ensure we truly understand what problem we're actually solving. You must separate data from ideas, assumptions, and guesses. This is absolutely key. You must use your data carefully to narrow the search. Don't look for a cause in an ocean of possibility when you can look in a fishbowl instead. So how do you do this? Here's one shortcut that stems from our gold standard problem analysis. Whatever your problem or symptom was, it invariably is caused by two things. Firstly, a change. But a change itself won't have caused the issue. Secondly, it must combine with an inherent weakness in the design or process that's under investigation. For example, your customer is experiencing slowness in internet banking. There'll be a router or a switch which is malfunctioning, and that has coincided with an update. That specific router had an old BIOS and therefore was incompatible with the update. Therefore, it didn't work. Question is, how do we find these facts quickly? The answer lies in using comparisons and contrasts. Doctors do this. They check your left knee versus your right knee. They look for where there's a sharp pain versus a dull pain. This line of thinking should be universal for all problem solving. Encourage your team to use comparative analysis when showing you their reasoning. Let them know how pleased you are to see it. This slide shows the path which is both the shortest and most reliable. So what about 5 whys? 5 whys has its place, such as to understand cause quickly when the problem is not complex. Or at KT, it helps us to get to the starting line, ready to start our investigation. But the question why is a dangerous beast, and its role in investigations is often plagued with problems. Asking why can breed poor culture. It encourages ineffective explanations. It encourages assumptions. It encourages bias. Yes, we all want to know why, but be careful to ask why, because the individual often feels obliged to provide an answer that is not supported by facts. Take a moment to consider this in the context of your own organization. Five whys is often ineffective at getting a fully rounded understanding of the cause of an issue. So many times we see simply on these forms and investigations, lack of training, or seemingly copied and pasted lines of causation across multiple investigations because of the bias it triggers. Your brain is telling you that you've seen this issue before because it's not being asked questions which demand specific factual responses. It's important to separate hard data from ideas. We've got better questions for you to ask. Instead of asking why, here are some questions to give you a fully rounded understanding of the issue. Here it is in real life. Start with recording the data about what specific thing had the problem versus what doesn't. Where the problem was first experienced versus where it wasn't. When the problem first occurred versus when it was last okay. And our fourth question, the extent of the problem, wasn't needed in this example. Then move quickly on to the next column. Look for differences, i.e. something distinct about the affected item compared to the unaffected items. Then on to the next column. Look for any relevant change or trigger event related to that material difference. This should then provide you with some possible cause to hypothesize quickly that is based on facts, as you can see in the final column. This is a golden shortcut because it avoids ideas, assumptions, and guesses. It's fact-driven, thus increasing your right first-time investigation. Importantly, using this is not thinking eliminates the number of possible causes to consider, because your possible causes can only be things that affect what the problem is and not what it isn't. You have fewer possible causes to consider than if you used other methods. It allows you to search for cause in a fishbowl rather than the ocean, thus saving you valuable investigation time. So improve your organization's ability to quickly look for cause by using these shortcuts. Encourage use of comparative analysis. Ensure you're presented with facts, not assumptions. Use the 4 questions: what, where, when, and extent. And be aware of the impact of why. So now we turn our focus back to decision making. We've already discussed the importance of sharing the backstory in the broadest sense of where the need for that decision came from and the priorities or the issues that led us there. Now we're going to look at its importance in the context of getting stakeholder alignment on exactly what the decision is you are making. Stakeholder alignment and quick decision making will only happen if your team understand the previous decisions that have been made to get to this point. If you can't agree what you're trying to decide, you won't agree on the solution. Ask the 3 questions on the slide. This should be easily understood and made visible. It really makes a difference how you frame decisions. For example, you're in a meeting to discuss a new shelf-ready cardboard box packaging supplier. But if there are stakeholders in that meeting who hadn't previously agreed on the decisions that had already been made to get to that point, i.e., not just the need for a shelf-ready cardboard box packaging supplier, but more generally a new cardboard box packaging supplier, and therefore the need for a new packaging supplier in the first place, beware. That is what we mean by being careful about how you frame the decision. You went into that meeting hoping to discuss choosing maybe one of, let's say 3 shelf-ready cardboard box suppliers. But the decision quickly derailed and has now ended up being a discussion about considering how many more potential general packing suppliers you can choose and questioning the need to change at all in the first place. Chaos. If you include the backstory and the stakeholders are aware what decisions have already been made to get to where you are now, then they are aligned. They agree on the decision you're trying to decide and therefore increase your chances of a quicker, more effective decision-making process. Make sure everyone understands the decision statement to avoid being stuck in what we call the court of infinite appeal. Think what you could do with quicker meetings where everyone is aligned on the decision at hand. When engaging people in a difficult journey, it can be likened to a climb. The goal must be clear. The explanation for that route must be clear and understandable. Do your people understand the why of the new strategy or decision you're making? We then need to remind them where we are on that journey. But because you've already included them in this already, they shouldn't need to ask, I thought you said the pub was just around the corner. And then you avoid, I had no idea it was going to be this long. What's in it for me isn't always necessary. They'll buy into it if it's a good thing to do, and they understand the backstory to the task and route ahead. So give our suggestions a go to avoid what we call the court of infinite appeal, which we'll come on to in a minute. They are even more likely to buy into it if you link it to purpose, context, and need. Take care of these 4 things on the left, and you'll have buy-in and good execution. The key here is that people need to be part of the journey. When you're not involved in this part of the journey, you're likely to have to be dragged up that mountain because they haven't bought into it. What we're suggesting is to involve them on the journey. There's no point telling them afterwards, as you'll be dragging them by their heels and it'll slow everything down. So what is this court of infinite appeal? Well, let's go back to the hike. The court of infinite appeal is like when you end up with people suggesting alternative routes on the hike. That person again, who always suggests, what if we just go to that pub instead? What's the point in going any further? This triggers another round of discussions about whether we need to continue on this route or just change the type of hike completely that we initially agreed on. This recircling is what we call the court of infinite appeal, and is something we want to help you avoid. Repeat appeals lead to delays in decision-making and poor compromises to keep multiple stakeholders happy. However, if you've taken them on the journey, you're much less likely to find yourself here. So what do we need to do specifically? We need a conscious effort to involve all stakeholders in the framing of the goals or objectives, and then a particular focus on how we are going to measure these options or solutions against those objectives. Ask, what strategic goals are relevant, i.e. the wider purpose? What functional objectives are important, i.e. the need? And how will we measure each option? Look at the 3 examples on the screen here for the hike. Are we all aligned on how we define and measure challenging exercise? This is needed to avoid conflict and appeals later on. These small changes can be enormously beneficial to your decision-making process. The only thing remaining to help you avoid the court of infinite appeal is your stakeholders having an appreciation of the risks involved in their decision, which we'll cover next. So how do we align? Sharing the backstory is once again key. Provide context about what led us here. Agree the level of the decision and make visible what decisions have already been made to get there to prevent the court of infinite appeal. Frame the decision carefully to determine the number of options available. Link measurable goals to your wider purpose to ensure buy-in. And keep the backstory short. The benefits of making it visible will only be realized if it's easily accessible and understood. It's poll time again, Andrew. So, of all the things that have gone wrong in your organizations in the past year, what percentage of them should have been prevented? You see the poll is live on the screen. See people voting now. Wow, more than 80%. So what proportion of problems in your organization do you believe could have been prevented? I'll leave it to you, Andrew, to determine how much longer.
Well, we're just about there. So we'll end the poll and share the results now. So it's sad that it's more than 80%, but congratulations to those people who are on less than 30%. I mean, all of this tells you that not every risk can be realized and managed in advance and prevented. I mean, life is not like that. But if you're higher than 30%, I mean, there's clear opportunity to prevent more. And I've been doing this very poll with people in different places for the last 28 years. And pretty much everybody says at least half. That's the mode answer that I get. So which just tells us there's an opportunity. But you know what? We're all too preoccupied with fighting the fire we got rather than preventing the fire that might come tomorrow. So that's something that can be changed. Back to you.
So these were risks that were not made visible, escalated, or acted on. On the one hand, in the auto industry, we see fantastic FMEAs into the reaction of cars during a road incident. On the other hand, time and time again, we see organizations not having a meaningfully enough risk assessment prior to multi-million-dollar IT investments. So what do we mean by not meaningfully enough? My colleague Andrew says that he's now seen thousands of inadequate risk assessments over the years, often citing comments in them such as, upgrade to software might not work. Mitigation is back out. That is clearly not sufficient. So what do we suggest doing? Our strong recommendation is to encourage your organization to read the rationale in the risk assessment and not just the ratings. Big outages are avoidable if people read the quality of the text, and we all want that, right? So leaders, feel comfortable saying, show me your risk assessment. And if you're not happy about the level of the detail, don't do it. Rushing it into work will not pay dividends in big decisions. Whilst this might sound like you would be slowing the decision-making process down in a world where everyone wants to be more agile, getting the organization to understanding this expectation prior to making decisions will eventually speed up your decision-making process because it'll give your organization greater confidence that it'll be executed successfully. But as the image on the slide shows, beware of the risk of status quo. Inaction could be the worst outcome. Reward and compliment those who provide you with this detail. Your influence is often far bigger than you expect. So we advise you to get your teams to be able to show you their risk assessment as part of making big decisions. But how? We strongly advise you view risk in the wider view of the decision you're making. An example framework can be seen in the slide on the left. Starting at the bottom, it shows the risks from change, placed alongside the opportunities from change. Then the issue and concerns that led us here, i.e. the backstory. Then what the decision is about, including the level of decision. And then the risks of keeping it status quo at the top. An example, selecting a cloud provider, is on the right-hand side. Having visibility of all these factors places risk in a way that shouldn't slow down your decision-making, but yet play an important part in foreseeing any potential issues that you can look to prevent or plan mitigation for. And with risk, it's not just about the risk assessment itself. It's about making sure the preventative and mitigating activities will work, i.e. it comes back to the quality of specific information in it. One way we've decided to communicate this today is through Hansel and Gretel risk management. Hansel and Gretel are the children of a poor woodcutter and his second wife. The wife convinces the woodcutter to abandon the children in the woods because of famine. However, Hansel and Gretel find their way back home by following a trail of pebbles that Hansel had dropped. On returning, the wife persuades the woodcutter to abandon them to the woods again, but this time Hansel drops breadcrumbs that are eaten by birds. Oh dear. Hansel and Gretel then end up getting lost in the woods, and I won't spoil the rest of the story for those who don't know what happens next. Whilst there's no advice we can give in a one-size-fits-all way for the level of risk you need to assess, The key message from us here is to ask what assumptions have been made in your risk assessments. Because what undid Hansel and Gretel here was the assumption that the breadcrumbs would remain on the path for them to follow their way back home, just like the stones did. A key assumption that wasn't challenged when proposed and acted on. Make that reasoning visible. It gives a range of people the opportunity to ask, what could go wrong with that assumption? Give it the opportunity to be challenged so that you have more confidence that it will work. This is a small behavioral change to positively influence others. So leaders, get your organization expecting to hear the phrase, show me your risk assessment. Make sure that risk is placed in the context of the wider decision. Make your assumptions visible to ensure that preventative and contingent actions will work. And be aware of the risk of status quo, because inaction could be the worst outcome. Doing these effectively will actually speed up the decision-making process because of reduced hesitancy, contextualization of the risk, and the improved confidence stakeholders will have in executing your proposed decision. Whilst risk is a common discussion point, how many of you spend time preparing for best case and beyond in your organizations? Generally speaking, humans have to make a conscious effort to maximize or even look for opportunities. We are wired to think of risks and what could go wrong in all aspects of life, but find it unnatural to plan for best case. The trouble with opportunities is not that they're not there, but we're either unable to recognize them or we do so too late. How many times have you heard the following phrase? If only I'd known about that, we could have. Did you hear that? That was a sound of another opportunity missed. This map on the slide requires you to get yourself and your people tuned in, and that requires focus. Whatever your role, start with examining your value to the organization. Use that as the start of your focus on opportunities. Where might your potential value be? What's holding you back? How can those blocks be cleared away? And how could we benefit? Here's a simple example. Starting with the yellow box for adding value and moving clockwise, take a minute to read this example. This example tells us that adding value often involves looking upstream of where we operate in the current value chain. Occasionally, the view is better downstream. It's all about looking up and out, changing how we regard our role, and doing something to actually overcome the obstacles to improvement. This is so much easier if you map it holistically like this. So to harvest your opportunities, you really need to make a conscious effort to switch mindset. Map it to enable you to successfully execute. So what's the benefits of following this journey? You can see them on the right-hand side. You have the ability to influence your organization to realize these benefits. Today's webinar should be filled with messages of hope. None of this requires you to change your working practices as such. What it does require is for you to pay a lot more attention to the quality of the communication. It's not just a question of sharing more stuff, but to look at the quality of the information at each stage. If you get a good backstory, complement it. If you get presented a good is not, share it. If the rationale and the assumptions have been made visible, let others know that that's the standard. And if you see people change their mindsets of how they see and execute opportunities, let them know you've noticed. It just requires a small shift in your behaviors as a leader to influence a lot of people. Harness the information and intelligence in your organizations. So to recap, here are the 5 main takeaways to help you overcome those challenges. Let these be your 5 compass points going forward. Underneath each of these 5 takeaways and compass points are the main points we covered today. So, one final poll, Andrew, before we stop for questions. Which of these 5 compass points does your organization most struggle with? Over to you, Andrew.
And the poll's open and rolling. It's always interesting, this sort of question for me, because the thing that people remember most about Kepner-Tregoe is the speed and effectiveness of finding cause, so problem analysis. But actually, this tells us a slightly different story of what's valuable. You know, communication is really important, not just for sharing information and making sure that your organizational ecosystem is lovely and healthy, but it's good for its own sake. I mean, we have this tendency, I think, to keep quiet unless we have something to say, but we need to make sure we are continuously sharing so that other people can contribute. And this is telling that story exactly. So I'm closing the poll here and sharing the results. Here you are, sharing the backstory, far and away the biggest thing, followed by stakeholder alignment. And that means you're going to have to involve people in the journey, as Conor said earlier. Lovely stuff. Back to you, Conor.
Thank you. Should you want to understand the methodologies behind these call for actions, get in touch with us. We'd be happy to send you the chapters from Ben Tregoe and Charles Kepner's book, The New Rational Manager. It covers our 5 core methodologies which underpin our thinking. So,
well, go on, Conor. Over to you.
No, I was just going to say over to you.
There are a few more questions that were raised in advance of this, and I just want to read some of these things out for you because I think this is potentially relevant and useful. People ask about information quality and what to do to improve that quality. And I think anytime you have a quality issue with anything you're doing, it's always look to the previous step. So if people are, for example, suggesting goals for a decision which are not helpful, you'll need to return to the backstory to make sure there's a common understanding of what's gone on up till now. I mean, it's always look back one step. And that applies if you're a real fan of Kepner-Tregoe and, for example, you're not finding cause as quickly as you'd like, the chances are you're missing some is or is not facts. And so it's looking back to your processes to see how you can harvest information about how the systems, processes, and quality of your production is running. Always look back one step. There are any more questions coming up? Do feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question out loud. I think I've covered most of them in the chat, which you'll also see in the recording. Let's have a quick look here if I missed anything. Okay, I think it's worth going back to this link of ecosystem. Ecosystem is something that comes up again and again. Look, your organization is an ecosystem like any other. It is incredibly complex and you can't control it. Not completely. It's never going to be under control. But what you can do is to make sure it's healthy. And one of the engines of health is this business of the flow of communication. And the more, the better. It's like having the flow of water through a watercress bed. If you haven't got the flow through the bed, you know, that watercress is going to die. Same with flow of water around salmon farms. You may not agree with salmon farmings, but if you don't get fresh water through them, then they're going to be a bit poor. Another question here. What do you do to speed up decision making when there are many more people in the approval process? So the answer to this is not everybody should be involved in everything. You don't have time for it. Quite often those people using KT decision analysis methods get kind of stuck with a big argument. And the answer is certain parts of your decision flow need to belong to certain people. Your chief stakeholder gets to, in the end, decide what the decision is about. Then all the stakeholders should be involved in setting goals. Then you can narrow the group, again, to certain key stakeholders to choose what is more or less important. And then all the stakeholders need to clear off out of the way and let the subject matter experts do their work in providing alternatives which satisfactorily meet those objectives. So different groups at different times, you can speed it up rather than having everybody involved at every stage. Quality measures or KPIs. One of the things you have to be careful about is the amount of time you take. You know, a lot of people who are here, and some people who are here and some people who are not here today, have measured the quality of problem solving. And they've measured it by actually reading the text of problem analyses that people have been doing. And they've said, well, God, Jesus, I'm having to spend 2 days a month just reading all the new tickets and it's really time consuming. Can we do it better? Well, the answer is today, yes, you can. You can start investing in AI technology and training your AI bots to read text and respond to that text. Same with the backstory. You know, if you think, well, you could use your chat GPT to check the quality of your backstory. If you're going to share some information, write it down into your chat GPT and say, what do you understand by this? And if you get some funny answers, you know you need to make an improvement. Or you can even ask, how can I improve this paragraph of text? And get some help. Now, I'm not a salesman for AI. I'm conscious of the fact that Senior Director of Microsoft did once say that it's neither artificial nor intelligent, but still, it has its uses in assessing things and reducing your workload, having to read quality in communication. And then successful change. The last and most important question, really, which is, it will always start at or near the top, as Conor said. So starts with leaders. Leaders have to model. If the people at the top of your organization are not going, right, here are the issues, here is what they mean, here is the impact, here are the possible next steps, and being concise in their communication, then no one else will think it's important. If leaders are not asking you about is and is not facts when you're investigating a major incident, they're not modeling. They have to model. Second point is you must have access to coaches and mentors. You know, people who are there to help everybody improve. If you don't have that possibility, then paired coaching works really well, or trio coaching. So Reg Evans started this theory of action sets, and a good action set is 3 people who are there to review other people's work. Many of you already have a 4 eyes principle. Make it 6 eyes periodically. That helps people to improve. That really makes it work. Good questions, everybody. Is there anything else? There's a couple more that have popped up here. 2 new messages I can see here. But I can't read what the messages are.
Just going back to that second question as well, like we hear that a lot, especially people mentioning how during COVID things were just quicker in terms of decision making, particularly those in industries where things had to get out the door very quickly and perhaps the purse strings weren't so much of an issue. And they kind of look back and go, oh, if only. How have we got back to what we used to be? And a few things that we were talking earlier about making sure that the objectives, i.e. the person who's signing it off or approving, making sure that it's the options are presented to them using their own objectives means it's much quicker.
Yeah.
So How to do that? Well, it's using, good, well, in KT, we'd use situation appraisal in that kind of interview, but really understanding what should the objectives be so I can present it to the decision maker in a way which they go, well, that's what I said. This is the option which best meets what I want. Therefore, what is going to hold me back here?
Yeah, I'd
It's a
like to
key
call
part.
out Yellow's response. I mean, about continuously sharing, he says, continuously sharing so that other people can give their input really resonates. And it's a very different mindset than no news is good news.
Mm.
I think we cannot afford to ignore what's happening any more than we can afford to ignore our children. You know, you know what it's like. If your children are quiet for too long, you need to go into the next room and find out what they're up to, probably just to keep them safe. And the same applies to people. Some of your people are relatively isolated now in this modern world, and just keeping everybody up to date with the rolling flow, and they can go, oh, hey, I know something about that, or I have a contribution, or you know what, that's the wrong track. Unless we keep it flowing, it's going to get lonely out there, sitting on the end of a Zoom or a Teams or whatever platform. If there are no more questions, then I think we're probably at the end, and I'm going to stop the recording. It's been great to see everybody here. Thank you from Conor, and thank you